So I went to a workshop once that asked you to give what you really wanted your business card to say. And mine was twofold. It was to help people figure out how amazing they are and to scatter joy, which is a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote that's kind of my personal mantra. And I was like, really what I want my work to be boils down to those two things. It really has nothing to do with my title, has nothing to do with the departments that report to me or the budgets that we manage. It's really not about those things. It's about taking care of people, helping encourage them. And so now I like to say that I love to introduce people to themselves because with college students, they are all in this season of discovery. It's a very self-centered season. Mm-hmm. They are thinking about themselves all the time. They're thinking about their schedule and what they want to do with their time. Everyone's asking them all the time, what's your major and what do you want to do with that? And it's just a self-focused time. And so I realize if I can be a part of that time and infuse this encouragement or infuse this reflective question or quite honestly, ask the right question at the right moment, like Becky Barker asked me, it'll be a trigger moment and they might have a new understanding of themselves that changes the game. Because all of a sudden they realize, oh, I'm wired for this. I'm built for this, and I can do it with a little bit of work. Well, maybe a lot of work. I can do this. And so that is what I do, is that I encourage students. I help them recognize their possibilities. Mm-hmm. And the rest of it is kind of details.
Welcome to Howdy Do That, where we explore the stories and advice of people who found work they love and how they got there. Today, I have a special treat for you as we sit down with one of my own personal mentors, Kristen Partridge. I had the pleasure of meeting KP 10 years ago when I was just starting college. Over the years, she has taught me many lessons on leadership, kindness, and generosity. KP has had an incredible journey and long tenure in higher education and student affairs. In this episode, she shares her wisdom on finding mentorship, how to get lost in your work, building lasting friendships, and so much more. So get ready to be inspired and take away valuable insights as we welcome KP to the show. All right. Hi, KP.
Hi, Charlie.
It is like the coldest day on record. It's amazing.
Yes, you definitely braved the wilderness to come here.
Yes, it is.
What an honor.
It is 6 degrees outside, and it is a nice light flurry.
Someone erased the city.
Yeah. I was telling KP earlier that this is the reason why Kelly and I chose not to live in Boston. And so it's shocking to see that it's 6 degrees here, 15 in Austin, and it's 34 in Boston.
You know, my dad was in the military and we lived in Alaska.
You lived in Alaska?
I did, in Anchorage for about 3 years. And just prior to that, we lived on Guam, which is a tiny little island.
Yeah, that's like totally two different corners.
It is, in two different worlds, really. And then we moved to Oklahoma. And I told my mom at 9 years old that, Mom, this is like living in both places in the same week. that's really what Oklahoma hands you. It's just wild weather, but it never lasts for very long. So you can tolerate anything. It'll be back up to the 40s in a couple of days. So we just have to get through it.
I didn't know you moved around so much growing up. Was that because of your mom and dad's work? Or?
My dad was in the military. He was in the Air Force. He's a radio engineer. And so ironically, I used to be in studios with him and he would have me film commercials for AFRTS radio, American Armed Services Radio. Okay. And he would pay me in Happy Meals. So I remember being in the studio a lot, wearing these huge headphones, bigger than my head, and just taping commercials after commercial after commercial, public safety announcements and all kinds of things.
No way.
Yeah. But anyway, he got sent to some really great places, and so we lived all over the world.
Oh, wow. Did you have a favorite and a least favorite?
Actually, I liked every place that we were. Like, it was in my memory, as an adolescent, you just go along with whatever's happening. But because it was broken into these little 2 and 3 year blips, I feel like it's easier for me to remember. Mm-hmm. And I liked every place. I loved Alaska because of how big it was. Just everything is so big there. I remember in the summer, we would go to the state fair of Alaska and there'd be these cabbages that were the size of cars because the growing season, there's almost 24 hours of daylight in some parts of Alaska. So
oh my God,
you could just grow things and everything got so big. And I remember just loving that aspect of it.
Yeah.
And then in Guam, I just love being a beach. So I figured out real early, I'm a beach girl. Mm-hmm. I can love the mountains, but I'm a beach girl.
I see. I forget that Alaska will have those seasons where it'll either be dark all day long or it'll be just sunlight and you're not really sure what time
Oh,
it
we
is.
used to walk to school in the dark, come home a little bit after sunset, just on a normal day.
Wow.
In
Yeah.
fact, my mom, we had this rule in Guam that you had to come in when the streetlights came on. It's because we would play outside and just run around the neighborhood. But when the streetlights came on, that was your sign, and all the kids would just run home. Well, I moved to Anchorage in the summertime. The streetlights don't come on because it is bright as day at 10:30 at night. So my mom was roaming the neighborhood looking for us because we were just out playing. We hadn't seen the code. She's like, new rules, new state, new rules.
That's so fun. So when did you move back to Oklahoma?
Unfortunately, my parents got divorced when I was 8, and we moved back to Oklahoma because this is home for both of them. My parents
see.
actually met in high school. They went to Bishop McGinnis High School in Oklahoma City, and we moved back to be with my grandparents. And actually, my dad was being sent to Reykjavik, Iceland. That was his next posting, and it was remote duty. And what that means is that you don't take your family on remote positions. So he was going to be headed to Reykjavik regardless of our situation, but we moved back to Oklahoma. And I remember feeling really lucky because I adore my grandparents, and I was going to get to live in the same house as them, the same town as them for the first time in my life. So there was some balm for the sadness, is that I get to be with my grandparents. And then I never left.
I grew up across the street from my grandparents, so I could literally see their house on the other side. And so it was the one place where my parents would let me walk by myself growing up. It's like, all right, you go straight to grandma's house and you go in, and it was always the best because they would just spoil you. And
It is the
yes,
best.
they would be like, what do you want to eat? There's like nothing's off limits. You want ramen? I'm like, yes, I love ramen.
My grandmother had a Coke fridge in her garage,
Mhm.
and it felt like the most indulgent treat.
Oh yeah, those
So
Coke
now I have one. It's to honor them, really.
Coke cans are huge as like a child. They
Oh,
would feel a
yeah. It
lot
was
bigger.
gold.
Yeah.
It's like, you have a whole refrigerator full of these? What are you, royalty?
That's so funny. So you stayed in Oklahoma and you went to OU
I did.
and you've been there ever since, right?
Well, I did have one brief stint.
Okay.
Yes.
What did you study at OU?
I studied education,
Okay.
and my intention was to become a high school English teacher and to teach Shakespeare.
Oh, wow.
And the reason that was my intention is that as a senior in AP English, my teacher, Lola Ward, who is still one of the most dignified figures in my life, Lola Ward asked us one day, how many of you are going to teach? And not very many people raised their hands. And then she said, well, then who will teach your children? And she just had this way of posing questions that really made you think, which is handy for an AP English teacher. And I thought about it and thought, this is where I'm happiest. I love to write. I love to read. This feels like a good fit. And so that's what I was going to pursue at the University of Oklahoma in Norman.
It sounds like teaching English was right up your alley, and it sounded like that was exactly what you wanted to do at that time. When did that start to evolve for you?
Pretty quickly, actually. I went to my first observation. The way the university program worked at the time, which I think is really wise, is that they would put you in observation as soon as your sophomore year. As soon as you became part of the College of Education, you had the minimum number of hours to become part of the college. They sent you into the classroom to observe. And I went to my first high school classroom, and I sat in the back for about 6 weeks. And this thought emerged in me and then kind of evolved that I am an educator, but I am not sure I am a teacher. And I recognize that that's kind of shades of gray for some people, but in my mind, it just took root. And I decided not to change my major because I loved everything I was learning. I loved the pedagogy. I loved thinking about the adult learner and how do you take someone who doesn't understand something and turn them into a person who does. So I loved that idea and that concept. And ultimately, it let me take more literature classes than if I changed to a literature major. So I stayed put, and I graduated from the College of Education with my undergraduate degree.
Oh, that's so interesting that you liked teaching and educating, but you didn't necessarily see yourself as an educator. I think for me, I liked medicine, and I went through all the pre-med courses and took the MCAT, but realized I like medicine, but I don't think I want to practice medicine. I
Yes.
think I'd like to be I know I'm kind of in the right direction. I kind of
Yes.
want to be in the surrounding spaces of that. But I think at that point, I didn't really know what was possible. Like healthcare administration was
Right.
never a possible, like no one really grows up and says, I'm going to go work in
No.
healthcare
Well, most
business.
people come to college thinking there's 9 jobs.
Right.
You know, I'm a teacher, lawyer, doctor, engineer,
Hmm.
artist. They don't think about the nuance
Yeah.
that's available.
So when did you learn about the career path of working in student affairs, student life?
Well, I think student affairs is a found profession because once again, none of us came to college and thought, I'm just going to stay here. I'm
Hmm.
going to stay here. People will pay me to do these things. And so everyone I meet who is in student affairs and higher education has a person or a moment or an accumulation of memories that kind of lead them in this direction. And so for me, it was just being an involved student leader and having these amazing staff that poured into me. And by that, I mean sitting across the desk from me, asking me incredibly important questions, empowering me to make decisions, putting a lot of responsibility in my lap. That's one of the things that I love about our particular institution at OU is that we really believe in empowering the student to make the event happen, make the program happen, make the session happen, and then teaching them how to do that in a way that makes them feel like they're making all the decisions so that when they go into the world, they're equipped to do whatever they need to do at whatever company it is. You know, I know they don't have homecoming at GE,
Hmm.
but if you've learned to run a committee of 100 people and mediate peer conflict and maintain a budget and run a PR campaign, if you've learned how to do those things, they translate. So I was doing those things as an undergrad with some really great mentors. I have one mentor who's the president of a regional institution at OU now. And I would always laugh because I don't think he ever made a comment. He only asked me questions. It was like there was never a statement. It was always, hey, well, what do you think about that? What do you think? And it really pushed me to consider things at a different leadership level. So I think that helped me a lot. But I had this moment right before graduating, embarrassingly close to graduating, in which I didn't really know what I was going to do.
Hmm.
But I paid for my own college. So I knew I needed to get out in 4 years. And I knew I would find something to do. And I'm kind of a make-do girl. So I just thought, I'd make do. And I had this conversation with Dr. Becky Barker, who
Hmm.
is the Director of Leadership and Volunteerism at the University of Oklahoma, and had been a friend and a mentor throughout college. I would go sit in her office. I'd leave my backpack on, and I'd sit in this chair across from her desk and just waste so much of her time. I'm sure she was like, I have work to do, please leave. But she asked me one day, she said, have you ever thought about doing this as a profession? And John, I just started laughing, just tossed my head back and just laughed and laughed because it had not occurred to me
Yeah.
that all of these mentors that were around me were doing this as a profession, that they got paid to do this, that this was a calling for them, that they were able to obtain higher degrees and do research in this area. Like it just never clicked until that moment in time. And between that moment in time and 2 months later, I found my first job at the University of Central Oklahoma in Edmond, and I was over campus activities. So I did a little bit of everything. My first week there, I took the team to the Pham camp and had to really dig deep on that one, go back to my 8th grade knowledge to really provide some really hardcore, great supportive advising for that. But I got to do a little bit of everything, and that was my first foray into higher ed.
Okay, so one theme that resonated with me while you were sharing is the impact of mentors and mentorship. And really, because as you were sharing your story, it's so funny. I have so many vivid memories of me with my backpack on, seeing your door open in the corner and going, I wonder if she's busy. Whatever, I'll just stop in and she'll kick me out.
Never too busy for you.
And I'd sit in and I was like, I'm wasting so much of her time, but it's wonderful.
It was so great. Never a waste of time.
Yeah, so I guess from a mentorship perspective, how did you go about finding mentors? What advice do you have for people who are seeking mentorship? How do you find a good mentor? How do you build a relationship with somebody like that to form a mentorship?
This is something you were especially talented at as a young person, and I felt fortunate in my role to get to meet people like you. But you actually summarized the best answer, which is to knock on the door, to ask for people's time. They're rarely too busy to speak with you. People are experts on themselves, so it's flattering to talk to someone about their career, and it's reflective and it's a soothing practice for a lot of people. So I think just taking the effort and the initiative, if you meet someone or if you watch someone and you're interested in their life, to invite a conversation or to share your curiosity is so flattering that most people are going to say, absolutely. What time you want to meet for coffee? Send me your Starbucks order and I'll have it ready for us. So I feel like it's just the intentionality of pursuing that, of pursuing your curiosity and asking people for their time. And I don't think you're going to have chemistry with every person that you meet that way. And that's fine. Too much chemistry is explosive, right? I think that you are going to, over time, meet a bunch of different kinds of people. If you're truly curious about people, you'll meet a bunch of different kinds of people who will give you different tools and different gems for you to kind of tuck away. And I think it's about asking for that time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone has this fear of like, oh, this person is too busy or maybe they're too important. And we start to put people we really admire on a pedestal. And I think for me, I started just, like you said, knocking on doors, asking people for time. And then you start to see one or two doors open and it leads to, the next thing and the next adventure and an introduction or maybe even a job. And you're like, oh my gosh, like this works. If you just knock, and it's okay if, it doesn't work out, because
Sure.
the one or two times it does, it can make a massive impact on your trajectory.
Well, I find most of the people that I work with, and I know I'm lucky at an institution of higher ed learning. I'm lucky to have the colleagues that I've had, many of whom went to that institution, have worked there for 20, 30 years. So I realize there's a huge depth of experience that's involved. But everyone I know wants to connect you to something good. And so when you take that time, especially as a student, and you take that time to seek out mentorship, to seek out wisdom and advice, to ask good questions and actually remember and care about the answers, the people sitting across from you are going to turn that into something good. They're going to hear you talk and say, oh, I want you to meet so-and-so, or, oh my gosh, you would love this internship. Or when a scholarship comes up, they think about it. In fact, I had a student that came into my office. She was really vulnerable with me this semester, and I knew her as a student leader, but we weren't particularly close. And she came in one day and started sharing her real story, the real struggles that she had. And it made her emotional, which made me emotional. But sitting there, I would never have heard the story. She had 20 seconds of courage, if you've ever heard that phrase, like 20 seconds of courage.
Where's that from?
It's from the movie We Bought a Zoo.
Okay, I don't think I've seen that one.
It's great. Matt Damon talks about it. It's kind of this ancillary concept in the movie. It's not all about this, but it kind of is all about this. But anyway, she had this 20 seconds of courage, and this kind of stoic, powerful student let her guard down and talked to me. And later that day, a scholarship opportunity fell into my lap, literally from a donor who really just wanted to honor a student who was grinding it out, who needed some extra help. And because she was in my office, she immediately popped into my mind. And I thought, this is the perfect recipient of this scholarship money. And was able to connect this donor to this student. And just the magic of that opportunity to do that. And it really came from her being willing to come by.
Oh, wow.
And good things happen all over the place like that. I really feel like people who are engaged in mentorship have a desire to provide good things for others. And they want that to be either, whether it's information or answers or connections or professional advice, whatever it is, we just want good things for people.
Yeah, it is, I guess, on both sides, right? Like once you receive mentorship and people who care about you and, go the extra mile for you, it's really encouraging. And then you can't help but want to do that for someone else as well. And so
Absolutely.
it feels like this cycle that just continues to give.
Have you ever heard the phrase that a candle loses nothing by lighting another?
Yeah. I think
I
that's what
literally
they
think
are.
about that just all the time of if someone comes in and I can leave them better than they felt before, then I'm lighting a candle. And it costs me nothing to share that joy. Absolutely nothing. But it may be a huge benefit for them. It may light the way in a new direction that I wouldn't have necessarily set out to do.
Yeah. What I love so much about OU, and the curriculum's great and everything, but whenever you're involved and engaged in different activities, you just develop so many great relationships and skill sets. And yeah, the curriculum gives you knowledge and some skills there as well, but there's also other ways that you can develop those skill sets. I found a lot of the different activities that I did on campus, those skill sets, they really did equip me moving forward, and the mentorship side developed. And so I think that's one of the biggest parts of the value that I got out of my college experience as well.
I hope students can say that. I mean, college has gotten so ridiculously expensive
Hmm.
that I really feel like the holistic experience, you really have to have mentorship. In fact, we know that about retention, that if students can connect with one adult, one staff, one faculty member, in fact, we know as specific as if they could have a meal in their home,
Hmm.
that their retention skyrockets, that
Hmm.
their matriculation toward graduation is so much more likely. And that's intense when you
Hmm.
think about how much it costs to go to college and what the consequences are for stopping before you have your degree.
Right.
Then that retention is even more important and that mentorship becomes even more valuable. But I think every student deserves to have that trusted grown up.
Yeah, it definitely makes a huge impact. And so now I'm curious about you start in your role at OU in this job that you didn't think was possible. Sometimes things that we pursue and are excited about initially, they start to lose their polish and you're like, "Oh, it wasn't really quite what I expected." Did you find that it was exactly what you expected and more, or did it kind of wear off on you?
Well, I think being a student leader, you get accustomed to late nights. You get accustomed to making miracles happen with $11 and some paper mache. You just make things happen.
Uh-huh.
And for the first several years of my professional career, that really helped me. I have a lot of energy. I make friends easily, and getting to do that with this new group of students at UCO was wonderful. And I had these ideas, and they were really receptive to those ideas. So I felt really encouraged as a young professional. I was able to get involved with our national organization. We have two in higher ed. One's called NASPA, and I was able to get involved in the regional board. So I was meeting these people who were literally icons of the profession. Once again, back to mentoring, just asking them about how their careers are going and what they expected. So I think it just helped me to understand a little bit more about what I was walking into. But I definitely think it's not glamorous. Like, I think a lot of people expect a job to be just a walk in the park. And when they encounter an obstacle, whether it be a personality they don't like or a specific job task that drains them, they think, oh, this isn't for me.
Hmm.
And I actually don't think that's a healthy way to approach work. In fact, I've done some training this year with a company called Giant, and they have this 70-30 principle, which is if 70% of the time you are getting to do things in your work go along with your talents, that align with your values, that encourage you and fill your bucket, that the other 30% of the non-glamorous things that you have to do is tolerable.
Right.
You have the energy to get through it. So when you ask, like, was it what you expected? Absolutely not. I had no idea what to expect. Clearly, I didn't even know what I was going to do after
Yeah.
I graduated. So it was not what I expected, especially going to Palm Camp. But I did learn a lot. And I remember thinking, everything I do is equipping me for something later. It's this idea of taking ground. And so I just really enjoyed it. And I started just tucking these lessons away, having great bosses and great mentors and meeting people who, even if it wasn't the institution I went to, that love their institution. And how do you work for a school that you didn't go to? And because most of the people in the United States who work in higher ed don't work for the school that they went to. So just learning a lot of those things and kind of collecting knowledge along the way was fantastic. But it was a lot of hours. I remember working about 60 to 70 hours a week
Oh my God.
in certain weeks of the year, when you'd have big welcome back weeks or, there's all kinds of seasons in every job where it's more intense, I'm sure. But that was the part that didn't bother me at all. And when I knew I could do this much work and it doesn't detract me from wanting to continue in this field, that this is a good fit.
Yeah, no, that's great insight. I think the way to get there isn't necessarily find something that you're passionate about, right? Because if you just follow passion, it's not enough to find work that
Agree.
you love.
I agree.
It's about you have to find something where you're developing a craft, a skill set, great growth opportunities. And then over time, you can evolve hopefully what you love into your full-time job and career.
Mhm.
But I think this principle of 30-70, like if you can find 70% you really enjoy and 30%, because with any job, it's work, right? Like it's going to be hard.
Definitely.
And a part of work is building craft, and building craft means you're taking on challenges.
Mhm.
It's not going to be just smooth sailing every single day. The important part is finding 30% that you're willing to put up with.
Yes. I tell people all the time, I'm like, you need to come up with your deal breaker list
Hmm.
because there's no perfect job. because we're working with other human beings and we're imperfect human beings and there's going to be conflict. There's nothing wrong with conflict, but if you're naturally averse to it, it's going to give you stress and anxiety that then is going to make you feel like other things aren't going very well when really they probably actually are. And so one of the things I usually say to college students when I'm helping them find a major that they want, or we're having a conversation about the challenges that they're dealing with is, do you feel like with this particular activity or this particular major, do you feel like your time is being given or being taken from you? And for me, it's a relationship with time. If you lose yourself in it, then it's something that maybe you should pursue. In fact, I'm reading a book by Marcus Buckingham right now called Love and Work. And he talks about that. Like, where do you get lost? And you look up and it's been, 7 hours and you had no idea. So that's a thread you should pursue is his concept. And so I ask students that a lot. Like, where do you get lost in your time? What would you do for free? And then how can we get someone to pay you to do that? And having that conversation, not necessarily what are you passionate about, because I can be passionate about community service, or I could be passionate about healthcare or educational equity. Doesn't necessarily mean that I should be in those professions. It just means I have an interest in those things. And so if I could let my interests mingle, then I'm more likely to find a job that will keep my attention for the next, some odd years.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think even towards this new year, that probably applies not just to your job, but other things that you're doing. This might be a good time to take a step back and think through, hey, what is it on a week to week basis where I feel like I'm giving my time to versus it's taking time away from me, and then pursuing in the new year, doing more things that you feel like you're giving your time to, and then eliminating some of the things that you feel like are taking time away from you instead.
So much of it is about expectation. Are my expectations being met? And that's what I do notice about our generation that's heading to work, is that their expectations aren't being met. But I'm not sure those expectations were set up to be reasonable in the first place. When you hear about these huge companies where there's heated toilet seats and they're picking the snacks at a free snack fair, and some of those industries which are really creative and I think leading the way of like worker satisfaction, it's just not realistic everywhere. And so if you have a deal breaker list of, hey, these are the things that I can't compromise on, for me personally, time has become so much more valuable as I've grown up. So for me, if you were to offer me more paid leave, that would be better to me than offering me a raise, because I recognize what the value of that time is, the feeling of freedom to be able to stay home with my kids for the holiday break, or to go on a more of an extended vacation and really give my mind a rest. That's very valuable to me. So on my deal breaker list, I don't think I could ever go to an industry that had a finite amount of leave. I would feel so trapped that would trump a lot of other things for me. And I do think that's one of the struggles that we're trying to work through in the workforce, in my field certainly, is how do you help meet those expectations, but also help new professionals understand this is industry standard and this is how we are going above and beyond, or this is industry standard and this is where we need to really look at some challenges we're facing and double down on our solutions. So I definitely think it's about expectations and time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I love deal breaker lists. You may not necessarily know exactly what you want to do, but you probably have a good sense of what you don't want to do.
What you don't want to do. That's right. That's
So
right.
another way to get closer to getting to do work that you love and finding a place of growth, I think, is looking at what is it that are those deal breakers, like you said, and those serve as data points. And at each role and every turn, you sort of learn a little bit more about what is it that you do like versus what you don't like. And yeah, I think that's great.
I advise a senior organization at OU, and so I find myself having some really great and timely conversations with seniors who have either chosen a major that they loved and can't wait to get out into the world, or are panicking because that is not the case, And one of the analogies that I've tried to use with them to hopefully calm them down is this idea that your first job might just be an oven mitt. It's paying some bills so you can have electricity and food and maybe a dog. It may not be the best fit, but it does meet some basic needs. And then maybe you look for the next job to be a mitten, and to where it's not tailored to you, but it's a little closer fit. And then you look for a glove, because as you move through your career, now, hey, this is what fits me. I can work this night shift because I work at night. You find some of those details that actually fit you, the person you're becoming. And then my goal in my life is to have a job that feels like a surgical glove, that I don't even know I'm wearing it because it is so tailored to how I am wired and how I am created that it feels effortless. That would be my professional goal, is to do a job that isn't glamorous all the time, isn't perfect, but feels effortless because it is so aligned with who I am.
Yeah,
That's my goal.
I love that analogy. So you started at UCO right after school.
Mhm.
Take us through the next couple of steps of your
Okay.
journey.
I actually got called back by one of my great mentors, Clark Stroud, and he was becoming the vice president for student affairs at OU, and called me and said, "Hey, we have this position opening at OU." And I thought about it, and I always wanted to work for my alma mater because it's the
Yeah.
best, right? I always wanted to, but I just didn't think it would be so soon. And so I thought about it for a while, and I ended up saying yes and came back to the university in 2000, which was very, very convenient for me, remembering how long I've worked there, because you just take whatever the year it is and
Yeah.
think, yeah, that's how long I've been
That's
there.
my brother's birthday year. So I'm
Exactly.
like, how old is he? What year is it?
Exactly. So handy. So I came back in 2000 and found myself in student advising and student programming roles, whether it be event management, union space management, those kinds of things, but really loved the leadership development component of what I got to do. And so throughout time, I just kept finding, closer fits. So I was the director of student life for about 8 years. And then I became the associate vice president for student affairs in 2016.
Okay. Can you compare and contrast what it's like to be the director of student life versus your current role, and what that transition has been like for you?
Yeah. The transition was challenging. My predecessor retired, and I just really admired her and wanted to really emulate a lot of her skill set, but we're just very different personalities. And so I learned a lot from her, but I knew that it was going to be important for me to do the job my way, because what people will tell you in my field is that as you move up, you move away from students. And most of us got into the field to spend time and help develop students. And so I was going to have to be really intentional about my time, curating my time, putting myself in situations where I could still meet and have relationships with students. Because as an administrator, it's true. The more you move up in your field, and this is, I'm sure, true in many fields, the more you move up, the less connected you are to maybe the thing that got you into that field in the first place. And so I was having to be very, very intentional about meeting students, having the opportunity to become mentors or just to share, just to speak with students. And so I made myself very available to lead leadership retreats or to give talks or, the kinds of things that are a lot of extra time, but really important to me. The biggest contrast between my job now and my former job in student life is just, again, that day-to-day access with students and student issues, kind of being boots on the ground with individual students. Now I have several departments, and so I feel like my focus now is the team members that I'm pouring into, because then they are pouring into the students. So it's almost like I've taken on a coach's role versus a captain's role, and that has a lot of joy to it. There's a lot of great lessons to be learned, but it was always important to me that I find time to be with students, because I knew that I would quickly lose my connection to the profession if I got lost in the weeds. And there are a lot of weeds, a lot of meetings, a lot of policies to be reviewed, and a lot of security to look at. And that's just how it is. It's the nature of an administrative role.
Yeah. I think to your point, as you shift in your career, you become, I guess, less of maybe the person with the direct piece of it, and you're able to coach others and expand your impact. But I like how you found a balance of growing your responsibilities, but also keeping true to what really brought you into that field initially.
Your capacity has to grow
Mm-hmm.
as a professional. Things have to get easier so you can add more things. That's just the nature of leadership if you're going to take that on. But for me, it's all about relationship. So I went to a workshop once that asked you to give what you really wanted your business card to say. And mine was twofold. It was to help people figure out how amazing they are, and to scatter joy, which is a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote that's kind of my personal mantra. And I was like, really, what I want my work to be boils down to those two things. It really has nothing to do with my title, has nothing to do with the departments that report to me or the budgets that we manage. It's really not about those things. It's about taking care of people, helping encourage them. And so now I like to say that I love to introduce people to themselves, because with college students, they are all in this season of discovery. It's a very self-centered season.
Mm-hmm.
They are thinking about themselves all the time. They're thinking about their schedule and what they want to do with their time. Everyone's asking them all the time, what's your major and what do you want to do with that? And it's just a self-focused time. And so I realize if I can be a part of that time and infuse this encouragement or infuse this reflective question, or quite honestly, ask the right question at the right moment, like Becky Barker asked me, it'll be a trigger moment and they might have a new understanding of themselves that changes the game, because all of a sudden they realize, oh, I'm wired for this. I'm built for this, and I can do it with a little bit of work. Well, maybe a lot of work. I can do this. And so that is what I do, is that I encourage students. I help them recognize their possibilities. And the rest of it is kind of details.
Yeah. You're so mission driven. And I think as a student that had the joy of getting to meet with you and work with you, you feel it as a student, right? You know what's happening. I just love spending time with you because I feel like each time I was spending time with you, you were able to apply your pattern recognition of your experiences and everything that you've seen and help me see my current circumstances through a different lens. And that was so incredibly valuable to me because I didn't have that kind of knowledge and insights and experience yet, but to get to use you as a filter and to hear about how you were setting out to do that, I just wanted to share that,
You're very kind. I mean, literally you sitting across from me today, just even thinking about you coming to do this with me, I was like, this is why you do the job that I do, is to have relationship. I was at your wedding and I remember you as a freshman, and I know other members of your family, and like just the fact that we get to be this deep in relationship is the number one perk of my job. So when I meet young professionals, I'm like, well, if you're doing this, you're about to make some lifelong relationships, and it is a huge blessing.
Yeah, you were
the best part.
You weren't just at our wedding; you made all the flowers.
I did. That was even more fun. It was even more fun.
Yeah.
Those other duties as assigned, John. I learned to do flower arranging in my early event management days, and it's a skill that stuck with me. I've been putting that to work. I've been pulling that tool out of the toolkit.
That's phenomenal. So who is higher education for? What should people think about if they're thinking about a career in higher education? What are the things that people maybe overlook or maybe don't think enough about when they are thinking about a career in
That's
higher
a great
education?
question, John. You're so good at this. I think it is for anyone who realizes early on what the college experience could be, that it's not just about your degree. It's not just about your classes. It's about the co-curricular experiences. It's about learning to get along with people that you would never have met otherwise. And when you see that happening, when it's like in slow motion, I know a lot of like amazing athletes and people who are just incredibly good at what they do. They talk about the slow motion moment where everything's happening, but for them, it's in slow motion. I think when you can recognize that as the developmental experience that's really happening, then higher ed might be for you, because you see past the late nights or the working the popcorn machine or moving the folding tables from one side of the room to the other. You see past all of that and you see kind of the bigger goal and picture. So I think that is something that I'm looking for as I'm recruiting in my field, is for students who just seem to appreciate what's really happening around them. So that's one thing. But one piece of advice I give them is, this is a very strange life. It's like Groundhog Year. You have to be able to teach and reteach, because our community completely changes every 4 to 5 years. So if you are a person that wants a problem to be solved once, this can be an incredibly frustrating profession for you. You really have to have some bandwidth and some capacity for reteaching a concept, or using a leadership language and knowing you've got to educate a whole new class of students in that leadership language the next year, or you have to give orientation training, you have to give risk management training, like you have to take those lessons and repeat them. And that's where the educator in me really came through, is that I feel a natural connection to helping people get to, where they want to go. And so the idea that I have to do something more than once, or strangely 365 days later, I'm wearing the same t-shirt, standing in the same place with a whole new group of people, and just looking around like, what a wild life.
Deja vu.
Yes, it's so strange. It's so strange. And in a weird way, it makes the time pass so quickly. until I had kids, I wasn't aware that I was aging. That's probably a very strange thing, but it was like, it never occurred to me because we were wearing the same, Camp Crimson t-shirt with my same friends who I love. And I would, I spend more time with my coworkers than my actual family, and I just love them. Right. So we would be doing these things. I'm like, weren't we just here? Like literally we were just here a year ago. And I didn't know that time was passing. And I just looked up one day and thought, oh goodness, like time is passing. And now to have little kids in my house is super helpful because you're watching them physically grow. When you spend your time with college students, and again, they look so different. They're all over the map, right? They're from every country in the world, and they are different age groups and different experience levels and different abilities, and they're all over the map, but they stay the same. That group stays the same, and they don't change age. So having little kids in my life really helped me realize, oh, time is passing. But I warn people about that now. I'm like, hey, when you get here, you're going to have to mark the time differently than you ever have, because otherwise you will look up and it will have been a decade. And all of a sudden you'll think, hey, is this what I want to be doing? Have I aligned my adventures with my goals? And anyway, so.
No, that makes a lot of sense, because even once you graduate, I felt like the seasons passed a lot faster. Whereas when you're in school, you have these semesters that go by and you've got these good timestamps, and oh, now it's Christmas break, and oh, now it's New Year's, and oh, now it's summertime. And you have, things that label you as like freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. You start to have these milestones, markers of
so many markers.
Yeah, and you don't get that as much anymore. What your comment made me think about is this idea of inertia and how it's really easy to get caught just moving down this path of, oh, I'm already on this path, and this is kind of the next step that makes the most sense, and you end up really far down a path that you didn't really intentionally choose, and you just kind of landed there. This idea of what's your marker going to be to help you think about, am I where I want to be? Am I going the direction I want to go into? I think that's really important.
I do this exercise with a lot of the groups that I talk to, especially this group of seniors called Life After OU. It's a course that's taught at OU. It's called The Wheel of Life. You Google it, you'll find a million of them. It's a life coaching tool, but it's this way to take a snapshot of your satisfaction levels in different subsections of your life. So picture a target that you would shoot an arrow at. And even with the rings, the concentric rings, and divide that target into pie pieces. And then you ask the participant to kind of draw in that pie piece to fill in their satisfaction level from 0 to 10 in that particular subsection of their life. Maybe it's their relationships, or maybe there's some financial security, education, health and wellness. You can name each of the sections that you would like to do. And it's this great exercise because you realize that there are some areas where maybe you're not at your highest level of satisfaction, but it's actually not a priority for you to be at the great level. And when you talk about inertia, I think about that of like sometimes your satisfaction or your dissatisfaction is not actually what you think it is. It's in a different area, and those areas are overlapping, because ultimately this wheel of life is you. But to be able to separate those sections and then to put your finger on it, to not be like, I just kind of feel discontented and grumbly. To be able to put your finger on it is really helpful and really illuminating. It may not be your job that's upsetting you. It may be that you're far from your family. It may not be your friends that are upsetting you. It may be that you don't feel empowered in your work, or you don't feel seen or heard, right? So giving people a tool, a way to succinctly express, hey, this is where I don't feel like I'm taking ground. There is no inertia. And then making sure they know that perfection is not our goal. Progress is our goal. So as the coach, asking, okay, so in this section, John, you gave your health and wellness a 4 out of 10. What would it take to get you to a 5? Not what would it take you to be a perfect 10. And that is where I think in general, people are missing the mark, is that they think they're supposed to be a perfect 10 in all of these sections of their life. And that's not really possible or really reasonable. So if you choose the section that you would like to make progress in, you will make progress in that area. And that's the best coaching anyone ever gave me, is to decide, hey, what does going from a 4 to a 5 look like in this particular field of your life, this particular subsection? Because where your intention is, there will be your progress. And it was so freeing to realize, oh, I don't have to be trying to get to the level 10 on all these sections here. If I make one incremental move up in health and wellness, for me, what that means is I'm going to drink more water. And if I try to do that, I'm going to do that. And the accumulated benefits of that are fantastic. So then your mental well-being is better and your sleep is better. You know, they all impact and kind of compound each other. And so I definitely think that doing it on purpose is the key. Don't be an accidental employee. Don't be an accidental parent. Don't be an accidental spouse. Do it on purpose. And that is where you'll see the growth.
Wow. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense because you don't want to just go solutioning randomly without understanding the problem. I think consulting taught me a lot about that, which is
I love that as a verb. I'm solutioning right now.
where half of the challenge, most of the time, if you aren't asking the right questions, you're going to land at an answer that is incorrect. And so you have to take time. And I always love that you had different tools like Yuzu and Circle of Life. Like you always just had great resources on helping people understand more of themselves, understanding where is the issue and being able to label it, put it into words, have a framework to think about it. Because once you have that framework, then you can start to say, okay, now I know what my issue is, what problem I'm trying to solve for. And that's when you can start to begin the solution. But I think oftentimes it's easy to jump the gun.
Everything's terrible.
Before figuring out what the real issue is.
Yeah, that's great. And I love what you just said about language, like equipping people with the real words to describe what they're experiencing. Again, this goes back to Lola Ward. She was so gifted when it came to language and words. And I think that's what I fell in love with in that high school English class is how language gave you access to emotions, to thoughts, to plans. That language was the tool that you needed to have. And that if you could wield that tool with honor, that you could not only free yourself, but you could free everyone around you. And so I definitely believe in the power of words and the language. Like I'm trying to equip my students, my colleagues, the people that report to me. I'm trying to equip them with language about themselves so that they can really solution for themselves. You know, it's not my job to come up with the answer for them, but if they have the right language to describe their emotion, to describe their frustration, to describe their joy, that is illuminating for them to the point that it can take them to a whole nother level of success and happiness and life satisfaction because they've got the words to describe it.
Yeah. I think that's why books will resonate with you, right? Because it's somebody else has thought through this. When you're reading a great chapter or a great paragraph, you get this wow feeling where, wow, like I've always have felt that, but I could never maybe shuffle the right words together. And here it is written out beautifully, exactly how I feel. This framework or this idea that I've always had a gut instinct for, but now that it's in words, it becomes so much more clear to you.
It's the aha bell. You know, when I was in student life, I wished that I had a bell that when a student had a breakthrough moment, when they said something or they realized something about themselves for the first time, that we could ring this bell and like have this moment. And so one of our colleagues who left our office for higher ed, he went back to get his PhD, gifted us with a bell. It's called the aha bell and it hangs on the wall. And that is what we encourage students to ring. Like, hey, you just had an aha moment. You need to go ring the bell. just lock it in, you know, lock this moment into your mind. I love the aha bell.
Yeah. Just celebrating a moment of inside
clarity,
Yeah.
right?
That's phenomenal. So where do you see your career going next, or where do you want to take your career now?
That's a good question, John. You know, I'm in kind of that middle ground of career in which I have had a lot of leadership experience. I get requests every day to apply for university vice presidentships or presidencies. I was fortunate enough to have an interim role of vice president for student affairs, and it really underlined what I suspected, which is that is not what I want to do. And that probably sounds ridiculous as an associate vice president to not realize that this is the next thing, the next logical move. But to find out that the next thing is not what you want it to be is pretty eye-opening. And so I feel so grateful that that was just an interim experience. It was about 9 months. What I've realized is I like to be a number two. I think if you interviewed people, they might think of me as a number one, but I've never thought of myself as number one. I've always thought myself as a number two, as that supporter, the context provider. A friend of mine gave me a phrase last week. He said, chaos slayer. And I don't know that I've ever felt more loved. So you're a chaos slayer. I literally cried. But, you know, I recognize that about myself. And so I know now that in this field, I don't wish to rise And that may be counterintuitive to a lot of people, maybe even people who are especially starting their careers. They may all want to be the vice president. In fact, many people in my profession, that's when you ask them, what do you want to be? A vice president for student affairs. I got to find out earlier in my career than many that is not the role for me. It's not what I would want to do. But what I find happening is just a refinement of my abilities and skills, a crystallization of my knowledge and experience, and that trying to share that with people becomes a greater desire. So I have been going through some training. I'm a giant guide, just doing some different things because I find myself drawn to the speaking, the training, the presentation part of it. My friend and I just started an LLC because we give a presentation on like a workshop on public speaking because we recognized how your ability to not only harness the language, but then stand up and share it really in many ways defines your trajectory. And so how do we empower people with that skill, or at least take their anxiety about public speaking down a few notches so that they're not held back by that fear, So anyway, I find myself really drawn to these kinds of educational experiences. How do I share a message of a book that I'm reading? In fact, I feel like just a cliff notes. I know a lot of people are not going to read, but I love to read. So I will take a few books on a topic and put them together in a presentation and be like, guys, this is what I want you to know. Here is what these three brilliant authors wanted you to know. And I'm going to break it down for you because I think it's such a gift that they've given us, and I want you to have it too. And so I find myself doing a lot of presentations, getting asked to speak to a lot of groups. And I definitely think that whatever my career holds, it's going to give me more opportunities to transmit the information of these brilliant authors that I'm reading and to put that in terms that people will actually take with them along the road. So I definitely think there'll be that aspect of what I do.
So it sounds like you're doing side quests now. And
Side quest, always a side quest.
would you ever start a podcast? Because it sounds like what you want to do.
Oh my gosh, John, just knowing how much work this is, I mean, it is the coolest thing. And honestly, I feel like I do a podcast. It's just not recorded. Like every day in my office, every person that walks in, I'm like, tell me more. I'm so fascinated by you. I don't know that I have the stamina, John. So you have some serious stamina to do this.
Yeah,
it takes a lot of work.
I love that we get to sit down and do this because I've always appreciated your mentorship. And so getting to have this conversation and record it and then be able to share it with others so others can have just a little glimpse into who you are, the way that you see the world. And you've shared a lot of great advice through this conversation. Is there anything else that you'd like to share college students or people early on in their career that you haven't already touched on yet?
We are in a very fragmented world right now. We were probably headed that direction, but COVID really exacerbated it. All of the social justice issues that we are just really struggling with as a country, there's just, a myriad of challenges. It has really underlined, and what I've been thinking a lot about lately is the power of friendship. And I know Gallup has just done some research about loneliness globally and how just this audacious number of people don't feel that they even have a single friend to talk to. And so I think regardless of the professions that my students are going into, or regardless of the different interests that my colleagues or my personal friends are pursuing, I really feel committed to developing the skill sets needed to have great friendship in life. Because we know that your life satisfaction is going to be based on relationship. Even the most introverted person needs other people. And that is what I've been trying to tell a lot of my students right now is you need to get great at being friends. You need to figure out how to have real conversation and not just virtual conversation. You can't text the things that you're texting and expect to have the same result in terms of your friendship. Like you have to figure out, in a world with so many mediums and so many ways to communicate, you have to figure out what the most beneficial way is for you to build deep, solid, meaningful friendship. And it doesn't matter what your job is. If you don't like the people that you're with, you could have the best job in the world and be miserable if you don't feel like you've got companionship along the journey. And so that has really been something I've been focusing on lately is how do we build good friendships? How do we teach people how to maintain good friendships? How do we curate the skills that it requires when friendship is no longer convenient? Because that's the thing about college students is They all live within a square mile of each other
Mm-hmm.
and they spend all their time together, and then they graduate and they're miserable because they realize that it is inconvenient to be friends. When you're an adult, you have to work and you have to take care of things and people, and sometimes you're taking care of your parents or taking care of pets and bills, and there's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Adulting is hard. It's a lot, but that's where I really want this next part of my career to focus, is how do we teach people not just to live next to each other, but to
Mm-hmm.
live with each other and to be different and to be able to challenge one another and not be canceled. That's really important to me. So that's the advice I give to anybody, is learn how to be a good friend and then really cultivate deep friendship, because that's going to make the biggest difference in your life, no matter what profession you choose.
Yeah, that's phenomenal advice. I know you're still thinking through how to teach people how to build friendships, but are there any tangible things or themes about great friendships that come to mind where people might be able to apply that to help them start to develop their community? Because I think you're right. It's so important is to have community and support, and no matter what you're doing, where you go, that's such a big factor that drives contentment and just life satisfaction overall.
It's so huge.
And we could probably end up doing a whole podcast on this at some point.
Seriously.
If mentorship is, going and reaching out and asking and just knocking on the door, is friendship similar to that, or?
Oh, it's a great way to pose it. I think it is, and it's showing up again and again and again. If mentorship starts out with curiosity, I think friendship actually thrives on that curiosity of not only caring about what makes a person tick or what's interesting to them or challenging to them at that time, but consistently communicating about it. And that's hard to do because, again, we only have this many hours in the day. And so how can you do that? How can you be consistent in your outreach to someone? And it's a real challenge. I figured out in my career, I meet like 1,000 people a year who kind of expect me to remember why I know them, if not their name. And that's challenging in itself. You read all this research about how most people are designed to have like maybe 100 friends. And I'm like, not me. I mean, my table's littered with my Christmas cards right now. I think I'm going to mail about 350 Christmas cards. And these are people I would take a bullet for, So I think a lot about capacity for good quality friendship. And most of it's probably because they're generous and kind to me. But I definitely feel like that's the challenge, right? Is how do you show up? And how do you show up again? And how do you show up when you don't know what to say? And how do you show up when you don't have anything to offer except your company and your presence, and feeling okay about that? I think just a lot of people are afraid to let other people down, so they just don't. They don't do anything.
Yeah.
Again, it's probably an offshoot of this expectation thing, right? Of having reasonable and healthy expectations of your friends, giving them the benefit of the doubt. I heard a quote once. One of my other former students went to Harvard Business School, and he called me one day and said, "Hey, I'm going to save you $100,000 and I'm going to give you the message that I've learned from Harvard Business School." I was like, great, because I'm not going there. I don't have $100,000. And he said, an absence of communication will always be perceived negatively. Hard stop. And I think about that every day. But in friendship, that can be really paralyzing, because if you are assuming if your friends aren't talking to you that they're mad at you, then that shapes the lens that you're looking through, versus giving them the benefit of the doubt. Hey, what if my friend's really struggling right now? Or what if, I know their mom hasn't been doing very well, or they're job searching and they're kind of having trouble. Like, giving people the benefit of the doubt is the quickest way to build just goodwill and benevolence with others. And I don't think people do that. I think they assume that something is wrong or that you don't like them anymore. And so if I could wave my wand over people, it would be to give them a little bit more ability to grant the benefit of the doubt in those relationships.
Yeah. Well, thanks, KP, so much for sharing your thoughts and your insights on mentorship, higher education, finding mission, developing friendships. You just touched on so many important topics, and I'm so thankful that I met you at the time at OU when you had time with a lot of students, and it was so beneficial to me and my career and just who I am as a person. And so I'm thankful that we get to continue to maintain this relationship, and I'm excited for others to hear about you and your stories and your learnings in life as well.
You are one of my favorites. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, KP. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Howdy Do That. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with KP as much as I did and were able to take away some valuable insights and advice. One piece of advice from KP that I'm definitely going to be applying this week is taking the time to reflect on where I'm giving and receiving energy in my life. I encourage you to do the same, perhaps by using a tool like the Wheel of Life to assess your own balance. Thank you again, KP, for sharing your wisdom and experience with us. You offered so many golden nuggets of advice that I know will be helpful to all the listeners. I hope you all have a great week, and thanks for joining me on another episode of Howdy Do That.